honor that. We will, so you should see your little recording bubble up there on the top. And you will see if you are coming in after. Also, we shared the Padlet link in the chat, and we're going to be going through that. So this is opened to not just directors at this point, just trying to be timely with information and communication. And so you'll see quite a few of our ESD staff or school psychs or other folks that are out there that are just interested in hearing what's happening and the updates. So it's a little bit different group than we usually have, just to be aware of that. And I put the link to Padlet in there already. And I am going to just go through new resources that have come out from OSPI. So I want to start first by, I think, answering the question that is on everybody's mind about direct service. So I put it in the email that I sent. There's also it also is in cases and WEA guidance. So if you go to the Padlet, the first link on there is WEA. And I can share my screen if you're not there. Oh, my screen sharing is failed. I think I probably shouldn't have updated my Zoom. So the WEA guidance is clarification from the governor's press conference on extending school closures. Leanne, do you want to share the Padlet just to help see if yours is working? My Zoom decided to die today, so I lost like our breakout rooms and all of those things, so it's being a little finicky. So there's our Padlet, and at the top is WEA guidance. So this is clarification on that. So after the press conference Monday, we've had several people ask whether Governor Jay Inslee and School Superintendent Chris Richtel are recommending or requiring students with significant needs, special ed, English language learners, Title I, to re-enter our schools to receive services between now and the end of the school year. WEA checked in with the governor's office and OSPI to find out the answer is no. So I know that there's been a ton of questions already. I was getting them texts and emails and all of those sort of things. And as we're thinking about some of the conversations and the pressure everybody's under, I also want to remind us as being good stewards of information that one thought or context could be blown out of proportion. I have not heard from Glenna or from any of this information that came out yesterday that it really changes where everybody's going on our journey here, right? We're all in different places about where we started and what that looks like. And from the beginning, we've been saying and hearing this is a case-by-case basis. So I wanted to make sure that you have clarification from WEA. The other clarification that's on there is from CASE. And CASE is the Council of Administrators for Special Ed. I might have that a little wacky. But they also were getting in front of this. So they sent out a memorandum. If you're part of that, it only came in email. I couldn't find it any other way, but I wanted you to have that out as well. I think from this piece, noting in that third paragraph, as noted in discussions, the situation that might include on-site instruction for students with severe disabilities would be very rare and would require a significant review of need and is not consistent with the Stay Home, Stay Healthy initiative, which is our primary focus. When I think of kids that are our highest needs, a lot come to mind. And I think we also want to be careful about how you maintain social distancing for some of those students to be able to serve them safely. So I think from both big agencies and from OSPI, the direction has not changed. We are continuing to evolve in how services are going out to families. We'll probably, hopefully, continue to evolve in that and get better and better at it. But I think there was a lot of reaction that now we're going back to school and serving kids one-on-one. I have not heard that intent from anywhere. So is that the first question everybody had?
Yes, that was my question.
Okay, so I wanted to start there. So those two resources, if you're looking for specific language, are on under direct service guidance.
Darcy,
So
I had both of those resources, and I shared those with our district team, admin team, but I think the confusion was around the way it was maybe stated by the governor yesterday, because one of our admin actually pulled up the transcript and I said, I don't think anything's changed. I think our original guidance is the same, but they were curious because it sounded different to them. So, and I'm worried that it'll sound different to some of our families, I guess.
Yeah, I agree. We're definitely hearing a lot of concern from parents, and from this region, we've heard concerns about increase in complaints. I had a chance to talk to Glenna today, so she couldn't make it today, but I think Scott called in, Scott Robb from OSPI, and well, he's also doing some other, he's multitasking himself. If we have some specific questions, he can jump in as well. Scott, are you on here?
Yes, I'm here.
There you are. Yep.
All right, sorry, I got a little guy in the background.
No, that's fantastic. That's all of our lives.
Right. Here, hold on me. But yeah, there we go. Hi.
Hi.
Yeah, he likes to work in the office with me, but
Nice.
he's preoccupied right now. So that's good.
So Scott is,
and I think Bill's here too.
Is Bill here?
Yeah, I see
I have so many people on here. There's like 3 screens.
He's got quite a notable background. So I'd recognize that one. So he's there too. Yeah.
Hi, Bill.
We can both chime in if necessary.
So I think in regards to the concerns that other people will take it differently is evident and probably already happening by people's reaction. But again, I haven't seen any change from leadership that's a shift. It might have been the way it was said or how someone took it, but I don't think that was any of the intentions. I think around our attorney groups and meetings and parent groups that we're all hearing and seeing around might be taking it that way as well. But I think we just need to continue following the best guidance we have, which right now is pretty much all of the same stuff we already had, but it's in a really nice big book now. Yeah.
This is Bill and Scott too. Do you know where this came from? I mean, why did sort of the governor even broach the subject in the first place? Was there something coming at the governor that made him talk about this or address this?
Not that I would know.
Yeah,
not that I know.
I have no idea. That's above my pay grade for sure. I have no idea what was being discussed. Yeah.
I think it does still address the case by case recommendation, and having that conversation with some of the kids that are our most needy or might need direct service. They're your ones also that probably you can't really do social distancing with. They're often the ones that need your physical prompts or potentially some behavior intervention plans that can be difficult to implement for sure. So I know that Glenna said this morning, and Bill, I don't know if you can look at this, that the numbers of complaints haven't gone up in regards to specific to COVID. There's 4 that are happening specific to COVID, like because you're closed now this, but the rest are just other things that were already happening and underlying at the state level.
Those were due process hearings. We haven't, I don't believe we've had any complaints regarding the time period after the virus started.
Okay, thanks, Bill.
Darcy, can you mute Sammy's phone, please?
Thank you. So with that in the background, a few other things that are on there before we dig into the guidance. I think people are using the word waiver, and I don't think that is necessarily the correct word that agencies are trying to use. So I'm going to use the word flexibility because I think that's what's in the request at this time. So Betsy DeVos is asking for input around IDEA and many other things also. I know that she waived the ESSA requirement, so there are certain things that she can and can't do. So considering requests for flexibility within IDEA. So the case and NCESD flexibility letter that is on the Padlet addresses 3 specific areas that they're asking people to look at. They're asking the legislators to take a look at. So in that, one of them is time flexibility. So our timelines, right? Being able to go, are we going to be able to get this initial done? And are we going to be able to do an annual IEP? What if parents refuse and we have other things happening where that relationship will be broken if we move forward? So there's some guidance there. Procedural flexibilities. So what if you're already in a due process and on a timeline? What does that look like? Stay put things, some language around that. And then fiscal management. Kind of what does that look like when we come back if it's not face-to-face and things like that. So this joint letter that they created as things to consider and requests went up to those 2 people, Lori and Mark Schultz, the acting assistant secretary. And so I think that that's where some of the parent concern is. And so I don't know if you saw, I think it's the Washington Post or New York Times they're looking to waive IDEA rights, and there really isn't any waiving as far as I know or have any information on. So using that language of flexibility is the request. If you have some really strong feelings about that, I also have included on the Padlet a flexibility request, ASAA, and that is from the American School Superintendents Association. And so they gave you an action alert if you would like to addressing the concern around procedurals and fiscal. And with that, I'm going to let Bill or Scott add anything they would like.
Yeah, I've gotten a number of questions from districts about this issue about timelines and that sort of thing. And at least currently is that there is no official waiver, or as you say, no waiver. And that at this point they haven't decided is that to waive any of those timelines. So it is pretty much the way it is that you do what you can and you document. If you blow past the timeline, just make sure you document why. Both OSEP and OSPI have talked about cutting districts slack about that timeline, and I think that'll take care of a lot of situations. But when it comes to complaints or due process hearings, that's a little more questionable about kind of how that would work, if at all, about going past the timelines and not being necessarily out of compliance for that. Can't say that for sure because that hasn't really been sorted out yet.
So Darcy?
Yep.
So I had a question to follow up, I guess, with that, and I'm not. So I hear about the timeline, and what Bill said is what I'd heard before, is that there's no waiver for the timelines, but compliance people and monitors aren't going to be out to get us when it comes to those things. But what's the best way to communicate to teachers that, because we don't want to just push all these evals and IEPs and not meet timelines and save them for a day when we're in school, because we're going to be so stacked up if we do it that way. I'm struggling to find the words to tell teachers and psychs and stuff that, yeah, still do the best, do the best you can with what you have. But is that the guidance really? Is that we just, because people are pretty diligent about writing good evals and writing good IEPs, and all I've said is that it just doesn't look the same now. If your evals or your IEPs aren't up to what they've been, that's just the way it is. But can anybody speak to that? Is anybody else doing something different? I'm just a little struggling with what to tell people on that.
I would go back to what Darcy said, and again, I can't emphasize it enough, is that decisions has to be made on a case-by-case basis. About, like, for example, people have talked about extending timelines for initial evaluations because obviously the difficulties of doing that, and face-to-face, that sort of thing. Again, I think we talked about this last week, is I would be very careful about making a categorical decision and saying is, okay, we're going to postpone all initial evaluations until school starts again, or something like that.
We're not going to say that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I would just be careful about that, because again, if you have to make a case-by-case decision, because there may be an instance where with a certain student that you're able to get the information, you may be able to have some kind of contact to be able to do that. And I guess that's what I would advise,
so I wonder if this is like the perfect jumping bridge into the new guidance. Because I think a lot of the guidance that's in there isn't going to be new. But on page 37 of that guidance, Travis, it says special educators and related service providers will continue to complete IEPs and evaluations within required timelines to the extent possible. So I think when you get to extent possible, you just document why you can't and carry on from there. So Leanne brought up the one-pager. She cut out just the pieces that were specific to students with disabilities from the new guidance, and it's page 37 and 38. So we can start by going through that. I want you to notice in the first paragraph right there, and I'll admit that this is mostly a skimmed document for me at this point, getting it this morning. But in that first paragraph, you can see case by case basis. So I think thinking about that language and giving that language to your teachers also is going to be important, because I think that it really does depend on the family and what they have going on in their situation, which is kind of all over this guidance throughout the whole document. So provide and schedule time between gen ed and special ed educators regarding lesson planning and lesson execution. There's a section in here that I'll bring up in a minute that has some time guidelines for how much time kids should spend in school, right? Like, just like us, we don't want to sit here all day on Zoom for 6 hours, just like it was. And so providing some of that flexibility that those things can happen collaboratively and inclusively, so it doesn't have to be something on top of thinking about those therapy and other academic pieces that's happening. Investigate and determine new introduced apps and learning platforms. Communicate with IEP teams, including parents, to address student-specific needs. Most students will require a combination of direct instruction in both gen ed and special ed settings spread across their day with time for hands-on activities. That next bullet again is we're going to do timelines to the extent possible. I think you've heard from all of the other guidance that as much as this won't be a punitive issue, that's not the stance that anyone's trying to take. So just make sure that if you can't, you're transparent and have some documentation for why that isn't happening. And then modifying materials, figuring out what those services are with IEP goals and what's the most important, how you can get those made. And then any decisions regarding special ed and related services for an individual student should be made by the student's IEP team and should not be based on diagnosis, eligibility category, or blanket policies. So when Bill said, I wouldn't say we're not doing any IEP meetings, that would be an example of a blanket policy. So just kind of being aware of the language we're using and modeling for our teachers. Okay, I clicked on this resource guide here. It takes you to an updated online resource. I shared it with you last week, but I went ahead because it was updated and linked it again on the Padlet. So that is available for you there. So I'm going to go back up to the top of this document. If you want to open it yourself and follow along, I'm just going to point out a few page numbers and things that you might want to just kind of highlight. And some are reminders because we've already had this guidance. And then there's a few examples and things that we'll be able to use. So first, and I named in our Padlet, compassion, communication, and common sense. And I love that they have common sense in there because I think right now is a time to just take a deep breath and go, does that make sense? So for some of the kiddos, I think that might want face-to-face in building service, like, does that make sense? I think we need to be having those conversations case by case, and we'll just keep getting better and better at the technology and those sort of things. So page 5 is reiterating that we are still focusing on the 5 priorities. Food being number 1, childcare, and then our graduating seniors, figuring out our learning opportunities, and continuing payroll to keep people whole. Here's another piece I think, like, yeah, we're not all where we want to be. The second to last paragraph on page 5, districts and communities are in varying states of readiness to do this. And this guidance is intended to be used as a guide to assist districts and key stakeholders as we define and refine our services. So I think, again, hearing everyone's in a different spot. Where we are is okay as long as we're not at 0, and we'll just continue to learn, grow, and changes as we go through that.
Darcy, there's a question in the chat from
So
Jolinda.
on page 6, the very top there, they define continuous learning for us. Thank you. Jolinda asks, are the auditors going to look for amendments that address this time and the adjusted time being served? Jolinda, can you help me understand that a little more? Who are the auditors?
So anybody who might come in and look at my IEPs and say, okay, at this time, we know COVID-19 districts were out of contact service time. However, there was no amendment that stated that the student who was receiving 300 minutes a week of reading now only receives 20 minutes a week of direct instruction reading. Is that something we need to make an amendment for this current time and then look at them all again when we come back? Or is it something we just leave alone and we do the best we can to serve the students the best we know how, and not worry about the paperwork? I just want to make sure that I'm filling out what I need to fill out, or making sure my teachers understand what their expectations are.
So auditors, in regards to what I think of like a fiscal auditor or something, special ed is audited through different systems, so potentially a WISM or something like that. But I don't know, unless you're like way at the far end of like a due process or something where you would dig that deep into that. There hasn't been anything from OSPI that I know of that said amend every IEP. And if we're prioritizing compassion and common sense, I don't know that we would necessarily see that in writing. There has been sheets that each district has kind of shared of like how they're documenting communications with families, what services they are doing. And there has been the for after we open guidance from OSPI, but I'm guessing that's going to be pushed back. So my answer would be, without a black and white, how you document that would be on a case-by-case basis. But I would have a system and use that spreadsheet that's in the Padlet to keep track. If you don't have a system already, there are some examples from last week that people uploaded. Scott or Bill, do you want to add anything to that? Okay, I'm just going to keep going then. Page 7. I just want to point out that, again, we're going back to this hierarchy of basic human needs and keeping everybody healthy and then socially and mentally well and building on those blocks. So again, I think just reiterating from OSPI that let's keep things focused on where we are right now and what our expectations are of our kids and families. So on page 13, knowing that we have graduation happening and quarters end, the very last paragraph on page 13, districts should give careful consideration before moving grading to broad categories of pass or no credit. So that's the pass fail. So again, I think it's that blanket decision, like we're gonna do all of this, and make sure that you might have some situations where it's important for kids to get a grade depending on whatever their circumstances. So there is recommendations. You should consider non-credit bearing solutions for K-8, right? Those are going to be different than your K-9. So this is really kind of addressing the high school and how those pieces are managed. At the top of page 14 is attendance. So we've had lots of questions around how are we marking attendance, and well, this doesn't say exactly how to do that, your individual teachers later on in this, they do talk about a system for them, but this is around state apportionment will be allocated based on OSPI projections of enrollment and are available on this webpage. Districts should establish a district or school-based system of daily or weekly attendance gathering plans for continual learning as are established. So I think that's saying if you don't have a plan to keep track of attendance, we'll definitely want to develop that, but you don't need it for count. Page 14 has some another section for students with disabilities. There's the review the guidance, because a lot of it's already come out, and any decisions regarding special ed and related services for an individual student should be made by the IEP team and should not be based on diagnosis, eligibility categories, and blanket rate. Page 15 under educational programming. So I think those first two bullets are important. Build in a reflection process with educators and community members for system improvement and supports for safety and social emotional well-being. And bear in mind that supports, approaches, and resources may evolve. So we're definitely already seeing that families that were really engaged at the beginning are like, I'm super tired now, and I just got this news yesterday, I don't want to homeschool anymore. And other ones that weren't engaged at all and are now going, this is going to be a long time. We got to figure something out. So I think it's going to happen not just in communities, but also within families. And so just making sure that you're sharing with your teachers that it's okay that it changes. It doesn't always have to look the same. Okay. And then at the end of page 15, if you're on the live document, it will take you down to a sample district level plan. So if you're at the district level, that will be helpful for you because it walks through some of the pieces that you can put in place. And I lost my spot. Okay. So page 18 has administrator checklist. So kind of pre-planning. You'll already have some of these done. Probably already have stage 1 done and part of stage 2. So just kind of going through what you already have in place and being able to go, oh, I didn't think about that. Let me double check. So kind of being aware that those are there for you, and it's also from people that have gone through it that are a little further ahead of us. And then page 21. So we're talking about, this isn't minute by minute. And so how do we offer appropriate time? Here are some guidelines about the delivery model and kind of thinking about materials and how much schoolwork and on time that looks like, and being able to coordinate your special ed and gen ed teachers. Because if you have a K1 kiddo and they're getting an hour and a half from their gen ed teacher and then an hour and a half from their special ed teacher, you've like already double maxed an appropriate time for them to be focused on academic schoolwork. So really trying to build a system where they can go together and those things don't all happen at the same time. Okay. And then there is like a kabillion resources in here that I have not even, some of them I haven't even seen. So I think being able to go through that and just go, okay, what are all of these examples and places for resources? There really is a ton. Page 31. Part of that with that scheduling ties into this and building a schedule. So helping your teachers go, okay, what does the schedule for that household look like? What is kind of a reasonable time based on age and everything else they have going on? And also this is a huge support for parents, right? like kind of what could that routine be if they don't have one. And those are all by grade levels. And then page 35, this is thinking about teachers again, keeping peer support and peer connections so that it's social distancing, not social isolation. Anybody with probably a middle schooler or up knows that those kids have that mastered on their phones and all their social networks, but the little ones might not have that connection or that capacity yet. So I'm making sure that your teachers are asking, who are you talking to? Who are you seeing? Something like that, to be doing that mental health check-in. And I think I already shared that. So, okay, those were my big walkaways from that document. There's way more in there. We can dig a ton deeper into each one, and I know I certainly will be spending more time on it as well. So I'm going to be quiet for a minute and see what questions you have.
There was a question in the chat from Sarah about questions regarding the matrix and minutes. Did that get answered, Sarah?
Are you thinking the IEP service page?
Yeah, for people who are doing their IEPs now, I guess they're wanting to know, do I write the matrix with typical minutes and put the start date in the fall? Do I list that services are going to start now with a prior written notice that says that we're going to be following the COVID thing? Lots and lots of questions from my staff in particular about that component. And I guess at this time, I just really haven't had a super clear answer to give them.
So I don't know if it's in here somewhere, but I've seen guidance saying that if you're doing an IEP during this time, the IEP would live 1 year, and you can make a separate plan with, this is what's going to happen if we're not in school or if we're doing continuous learning. But I haven't, from a practical stance, I wouldn't leave off what you would hope to have when they come back for services, because then you're going to get back into Travis's question around, you're going to have to do every IEP again. So my recommendation would be to do the annual review and a split matrix. And I'm not even sure if I would direct my staff to do a split matrix. I would probably say this is the plan if we're not in school. Because if you say you're going to start September 1 and we don't start September 1, then you're back at, okay, now I've got another date I have to go back and change.
So we would just write the matrix as normal, given the fact that we would be in school consistently, and then you would place it in a prior written notice that we're following the COVID plan, and that when school resumes, we'll pick it up?
That'd be my recommendation. Scott and Bill?
I've heard some districts are not amending the IEP, keeping that as providing generally FAPE. And then what they do is what they document for the interim services during this period is like in a distance learning plan, something like that, or, you know, that would just kind of spell out what you're doing now. So, and that might, you know, you might be able to use a prior written notice for that, but the idea is to make sure parents are informed of what the student should be receiving during this time.
Bill, do you have an example of what they used for a distance learning plan? Most of our districts are using IEP online, and there's not anything really in there to grab. So I think it's also a technical question. Like, is there a form then that we just can use and upload?
There's a template. OSBI's created a template. It's called the Continuous Learning Plan that you might be able to use to document the interim services.
Is that the one about compensatory ed?
No, I think that's a different one.
Okay, I haven't seen a distance learning plan, so maybe I missed it. The one I've seen was the compensatory ed to be filled out after. There is a chart in there if we just want to make one and put that chart in of what's happening. But
No,
I don't know, system-wise, you want to find a way where you can track that. So if I was sitting in a district today and I can only answer as if I would say prior written notice, because it's a technical system your staff are already familiar with, and it's not creating something new on top of all this to keep track of and manage.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it.
Mm-hmm. Heidi said, I'm wondering if we could contact IOL to put in a notes page and just blank and schedule it. You could, there is an IP online at the very front. You could create a note and do it there, Heidi. That's a good idea.
It's under the demographics tab.
Mm-hmm. Does everybody know where that is? So you
But
could
we
document
would-
it there.
But we would have to create the verbiage, right? And just have everybody copy and paste that same verbiage basically into their note portion of IOL, right? So that everybody was kind of sending the same message out.
Well, I don't know if it would be a message out. I think I would use that if I was writing an annual IEP, because it was time. And I'd say this is for when we come back to school, and there's a distance plan in the notes, and in the notes, I'd put that distance plan for that kid.
Okay.
Or you could
Okay.
upload it and attach it to the IEP.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm thinking I already, we sent out all the procedural safeguards in Spanish and English and all that kind of stuff so that staff could get them out to the parents through various formats. And I'm wondering if this distance learning plan would also be a component per kid. Obviously, we would have to
Compensatory
update
ed
it.
guidance
Yeah,
from
like,
OSPI.
yeah.
Okay, other questions? Any word about expanding ESY? I have not really heard anything about ESY. I think it will start bubbling soon, but I think right now people are trying to get in their group. Scott says ESY latest guidance is question A11 and A12. Okay, with that, it's 1:44. I'm going to turn off the recording and